What do I think about when I think of the 80s? I don't know, Miami Vice and the A-Team.
I think of neon colors and cut-off shirts, faded neon sometimes, side ponytails, ridiculous high tops.
Mashing concepts, groups like the Talking Heads, taking their new wave and mixing it with Afrobeat. Groups like the Police, taking their punk and their reggae, mixing it together. The dawning of hip hop.
Shoulder pads?
I think of a lot of sort of bombastic approach to style and music and culture and food when I think of the 80s.
Microwavable, dinners, things that were like packaged, and you had your pizza rolls, your the beginnings of all these things that are just like grab and go eats.
In the 80s, we would make these toaster strudels and we could walk with them to school. And that is like what you see time and time and again, like the modernization of Israeli food or the adaptation of Arabic food into Israeli is usually by stuffing it into a sandwich. So you can drive, talk on the phone, smoke a cigarette, and still eat, right? Because you got like work to do, right? And I feel like that in a lot of ways represents like the 80s food. It's like a little bit of form, but mostly function. So the dish that we're making today are borekas, which are this Balkan pastry that was probably the reason I started cooking. That was like the grandmother dish that every chef basically has. And it sort of tells the story of Sephardic Jews leaving medieval Spain, moving to the Balkans, getting conquered by the Ottomans, and then moving this dish basically to Israel. It's this flaky, buttery, super savory pastry that's like fun to eat and was one of like 3 things I ate as a kid. So we're gonna take the borekas and we're gonna like open them up and stuff them almost like sandwiches, like with feta cheese, and then matbucha, which is a North African pepper like condiment, like a sweet and sour situation. And then we're gonna serve it with like pickled peppers and cucumber and tomato in like a brown paper bag, which is kind of the way that you get these pastries in Israel, like a kind of greasy like brown paper bag. I was born in 1978, so I'm literally like the 80s was my jam, And like Hot Pockets or those like pizza bite things, I feel like this is like right there with it, So it should evoke like pizza bites.
So tonight's dish is it's going to be a pasta salad. So pasta salad really kind of took off in the 80s. I wanted to create something that felt like there was some aspects that reminded you of like an old school pasta salad, but with the pasta being not super overcooked with a bunch of dry herbs. Just want to kind of do something a little bit fresher, a little bit more contemporary. How's everything?
How are you?
So this one is, we have squid ink pasta, different kinds of green chilies, shiso, sea urchin, and octopus. It's like a spicy Japanese one. And this is like more of your classic, 80s smoked mozzarella, grilled artichokes.
Nice.
This is the one's a little more Italian.
Nice.
Food in the 80s, I feel like, was still coming out of this period of, a lot of discovery of like technology, so like the microwave and making things kind of easier, and not a lot of access to a variety of ingredients.
People weren't so concerned about where the ingredients were coming from. Even people weren't concerned about additives in food. People didn't talk about that too much. There are even old ads where it was almost a good thing when certain things were able to be achieved by adding additives, The cheese is so orange more than the real one. There used to be like these ads. And I think today we're in a totally different world, thankfully.
That kind of also has allowed us to approach food in a different way, where you're using more flavorful ingredients, more things are fresher because there's a little bit more focus on working with local farms, so you're able to not need to mask flavors sometimes, and the sauce work is a little bit lighter. It's not so much about trying to keep things busy. It's a little bit more simplified, I think.
I've been cooking for 25 years, and probably 20 of those years have been so focused on how can I add things. Only in the last maybe 4 years or so, I really been very focused on taking things away. And taking things away is a lot harder. There's no more room for error, and it's the most difficult cooking that I've undertaken so far. Today is all about 80s food, and I think it's really 80s food in America. So I grew up in Switzerland, so honestly I had to Google what 80s food in America is. But the thing that caught my attention was sloppy joes. And so we're doing a version on a sloppy joe with braised oxtail and black truffles, and we have these beautiful brioche buns, and then we have this like celery relish to have some acidity, so it's quite rich, but it has some acidity, and all together it's actually really delicious.
Tonight we're going to serve like a modified version of our modified version of Lobster Thermidor. So at the restaurant, the lobster has been turned into a cracker, and then the Thermidor is, the sauce becomes a dip that we like brulee. But it being summer and in the Hamptons, I wanted to incorporate actual lobster with it, plus we're going to use the grill. So we're going to do grilled lobster and toss it almost like in a little succotash with corn and all this other stuff that's super in season right now, and then top it with that Thermidor sauce, and then put a couple of the crackers in it. In the 80s, you know, lobster in French exuded, and like it still kind of does, but it exudes luxury and success, you know, and so lobster is that.
So as a child of the 80s, I was obsessed with nerds. Basically, the candy aisle was on fire in the 80s, and that was where I got most of my calories for the day. But nerds were like the big incoming candy of the early 80s. But I made layer cake and cake truffles to the tune of my two favorite nerd combos, which is lemonade and cherry strawberry lemonade nerds. I brought little boxes of nerds, and I made these sweet little bites of cake and slices of cake to celebrate the greatest candy of the 80s, nerds. So it's layers of vanilla cake, there's a lemonade soak, there's a pickled strawberry and cherry jam, there's some milk crumbs, there's a lemonade cheesecake, and then it goes up again, and this is a strawberry cherry frosting. I've played around with the flavors of cherry and strawberry and lemon before. Those are very like typical go-to flavors for a pastry chef. But nerds have like a deeper acidity, they have a texture to them. And being a pastry chef, I love going back to the standard form of something like a layer cake and innovating around the construct of a layer cake. So I'm going like for the like underdog approach, like under the radar. You're not going to be scared when you see this beautiful little slice of cake or cake truffle. You take a bite and your eyes just like pop out of your head. Every decade lends itself to a few new styles of cooking.
Food is a little bit like fashion, I would say. Trends come and go, and it's sort of like a pendulum that swings. In one trend, we're very, focused on the techniques. And then in other times, we're really like back to nature and finding everything ourselves in the woods. And that's kind of the spectrum. And within that, we've been going for many, many years.
Fashion and food often reflect themselves. If you think about the fashion styles of the 80s, you get a lot of like bright colors. You get a lot of kind of like cheeky things.
I think it was such an interesting time because you look back and music and movies and everything stands out. Even if there were trends that didn't work, it's exciting to kind of like laugh about it and look back at those things because they were, things that you knew that people were saying like this is really cool and fun and different and even if it was a really bad idea, I think taking those risks, and I think that happened in food too, the really high platings of food and all the different colors and the focus on the presentation, I think that really came to be in the 80s.
How we're influenced by what we put on a plate is drawing inspiration from all around, and they all kind of tie in and feed one another in terms of like art forms, decade to decade.